But what specifically are they farming? Like when they say yield farming, like what are they just
Mhm.
looking for like arbitrage like opportunities or like what are they actually like looking for?
Oh, yeah. So kind of go back on the yield farming thing is
Yeah.
like I think starting from March, the compound started to give out governance token comp when you're participating in the protocol, if
Hmm.
you recall that. So if you borrow or supply to the compound, then they'll give you the comp token. And so that comp token, because it has some value, then people found out that, hey, I can, just supply or borrow even if I don't have need for it. Then I get like additional yield, like, more interest per se, from because you gain this extra free token, right? This
Hmm.
comp token. And then there are more protocols that kind of follow this governance token distribution. And so a lot of people start doing this yield farming, which is basically putting your funds or into a protocol, and then these protocol would reward you with like these governance token, and some people would dump it and gain more principal and come back to farming.
Hmm.
Do the same thing over and over again. That's essentially yield farming. Some people would of course keep the tokens themselves if they're longing the token. So yeah,
Okay,
that's kind
so
of yield farming. And so like, but like selling these tokens on Uniswap is a pretty expensive process, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so big, yeah, and it's doesn't make sense for a retail person to kind of do that, keep doing that, because it just eats up all the interest
Hmm.
or revenue from the yield farming. So like there's an idea basically from like Yearn is that they can pool all the funds together and then
Yeah.
they do this for you,
Right.
right? And that's the same for Pickle.
Okay, so wait, just like backtracking a little bit. So you talked about like
Hmm.
they like Compound giving this governance token, right? And so like what when I have that governance token from Compound, like they give me that because I've
Hmm.
staked something, right? Because like made some deposit.
Yeah,
So is it the same as it's not the same as
yeah.
a C token though, is it?
No, it's not the same as seed token. The seed token is like for example, you put in DAI, then you get C DAI.
Right.
That's a token that you can redeem your DAI, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's C token. But this governance token is like you can use this to participate in the governance in the DAO per se.
Hmm.
So you can use comp to vote about the different proposals and deciding how the protocol should work or how the perimeter should be set in the compound protocol. So yeah, that's the idea of governance token.
Okay. And so like when I get this governance token then how does that translate into me getting some more percentage of yield than just like making a deposit to Compound?
The issuer of the token would say like this token is valueless, but then on Uniswap it actually has value, right?
Okay. Gotcha.
So for example, comp token is like $100 per token. Then you can
Hmm.
sell this token, right? So
Yeah.
so if you like supply your asset into compound, let's say you have a 1% of interest for compound itself. Now on top of that, you also get comp token. So it
Yeah.
basically, if you sell it, then it basically adds up, your interest, right? So
Yeah.
that's what yield farming is. Yeah, and
Gotcha. Gotcha.
that I think at some point, um, in the beginning there is like if you do what we call folding, like basically you do supply die and then borrow die out and then supply those die again and then borrow die out again and then supply those die, like kind of repeating this process. Um, like you can get like 80% of interest on
Hmm.
the same principal, um, with
Okay.
almost no risk because you're supplying and borrowing the um, same asset.
Right. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's making sense to me now. So that's like where the farming part is coming from. Like you're doing some action that is like producing some yield elsewhere, basically, that you are then like
Yeah.
able to kind of reap. Um, okay, and so Yearn does that. Like, yeah, obviously as an individual, you can't really do that because you have to pay every time you do those transactions. But if you have a large enough pool,
Mhm.
then like you can make some money off of that. And so you're saying Pickle
Mhm.
is essentially doing the same thing as Yearn.
Yeah, exactly. They're
Okay.
doing the same thing as you.
Cool. Okay. Now I have like the framing, the context for what we're talking about. So
Yep.
now like then Pickle is getting hacked, and so on the Twitter thread. Okay, so he like pointed out the places in the contract where like
Yeah.
the places where the attacker or I guess the places where the exploit was made possible. So
Mhm.
so like Pickle has these jars. So like are jars like pools?
Jars, you can think of a place that you put your funds in.
Okay.
So they have like die jars. So you basically put your die into that jar, and then they'll invest those die for you. So that's jar.
Gotcha.
It's
Okay.
their jargon.
That's their jargon. That's great. Okay, so what happened with this hack then? Someone basically
So
sent funds to a jar and then sent it to another jar. That's what I understand so far.
yeah, their jar alone is, I believe, was pretty safe. So like the jar itself is like you put the funds in, they invest all that. So that part is okay. Now for the like user experience, I'd say they have another contract that allows you to swap your asset between different jars. Like let's say um, you have like dye and dye jar, and you want to like change it into another asset, like and without taking them out by yourself.
Mhm.
They provide this kind of UX improvement smart contract that helps you swap out the asset like from jar to jar, right?
Okay.
And so
Wait, so
um,
you're
now
moving the same asset,
mhm.
the same type of asset.
I believe they traded. I haven't really looked into all the details there, but
Mhm.
I believe they trade those assets and then supply it to another jar because
Okay.
the other jar takes in another kind of asset, right?
Okay,
So
gotcha. So it is a swap then. Okay.
yeah, so that's why it's called a swap there.
Yeah.
I have to look into their contract to really say what's going on, but that's as far as I could remember.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and so in this contract, then like the main issue was they did not have a input sanitization
Mhm.
on the jars. So you can essentially have a malicious jar in the input, like a malicious smart contract in the input, and say like,
Right.
hey, I'm a jar, like swap your funds to this place, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so like how would they have prevented that though? Because if you're saying like they needed to sanitize it, right? So would that mean that they have to check that the contract that is being input is like a valid jar? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because essentially jars are what they deployed, right? So they can
Right.
whitelist those.
They can
So
whitelist it, yeah.
yeah, essentially what should be done is like they check for a whitelist, and then just if it's not in these whitelisted jars, then it's invalid.
Okay.
But of course,
Um,
there's a lot of more details into this hack. I wouldn't say this is that simple, but this is like the main issue. Because for a malicious jar to work, you also need a fake underlying. You need to set up like some other stuff to kind of trick the the smart contract that is doing this swap.
Right.
So, but the main component is that, hey, this is not input sanitized, and so you can do the swap.
Yeah. Okay, so that means like the person who executed this attack then they also had to write. Are you saying they had to write a set of other contracts that were also fake?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. They have to. They have to. I believe they have to write two contracts. One is a um, fake asset, and then the other is the malicious jar. And this malicious jar would say like, "Hey, this fake asset is indeed the asset that I'm providing to you.
Yeah.
That I'm swapping. So, um, you give me all the DAI, I give you all this fake asset."
Gotcha. So how
Yeah.
how then like are they able to were they able to take so much? Like that's the other thing, the other piece of this. So like looking at the Twitter thread, um, they have this like swap exact jar for jar, and then they have this like p die earn, like three calls to that, and then another jar
Mhm.
swap. But like how within those three calls are they taking $20 million almost? 18.7 or something?
I need to look into it. But my understanding is like because you're providing a fake asset, right? And it base it basically asks you how much money that you have, and you can because it's under your control, then you can say like I have a bunch, right?
Right. I think I'm getting this now. The jar thinks that I have $20 million on some asset that I just made up, and or
Mm,
20 million die of this asset, right? And so then the jar's like, okay,
yeah.
I'll send you 20 million die because you told me you have 20 million of
Mhm,
this random asset. And
mhm,
so, like you were saying before, this jar swap that's happening is actually trading. So that means like it is getting real DAI being put into this. But what is it exchanging? Is it exchanging my fake asset for real DAI? Like, does that mean someone else ends up with my fake asset, or the pool itself ends up with my fake asset?
I believe so, but I would need to check that. I would need to check
Yeah.
that. But that is my current guess. That
Right.
is my current guess. Well, I mean, the hacker didn't drain all the jars. Like he only drained one
That
jar,
one. Right.
and yeah, that one. And there's some other money to be left. He just didn't bother. I'm not sure why. So that you never know, but I guess 20 million is enough.
That's what I said too. Yeah, I must have read that somewhere. Someone's like, "Oh, I don't understand why they didn't just like take more or something like that." And I'm like, "Well, when you have $20 million, I mean, do you really need to keep going? Like, cover your tracks." Um, but yeah, people are also
Yeah.
saying that like the person who pulled this off was like an expert at Solidity and the EVM. Would you
Mm.
like is that your perspective too, that like they really like understood deeply, or is this just like someone read the contracts and knew how they worked?
It's kind of hard to say it because like in hindsight, it might seem like why did they not do the input sanitization? Like this
Yeah.
seems obvious or stuff. But like in fact, it like when you're developing or even when you're reviewing, that might not be the case. Like you have to think about all these different attack vectors and then kind of try to poke it, look at the right places.
Yeah.
Um, and at the same time, I wouldn't say Solidity is that hard either.
Yeah. That
Like a
well,
lot of people, like a lot of people can if they can read, they really ramp up. It's I wouldn't say it's really that hard. Um, but I would say it it does take some knowledge, because he seems to understand this system, like the Pickle system, pretty well. So
mhm.
he must have looked at the set of contracts for some time, and then was trying to poke around with it, and found this issue and decided to you know drain it, right? So
I feel like that to me that would be my guess too, because like
mm,
um I mean, for most of these things, there's like not a ton going on, right? Like, and so, again, like you said, like Solidity is easy to, if you're a developer, like even like, you know, fairly like entry level developers, like Solidity is not that hard to understand. Um, so it seems like kind of a, I don't know. I don't want to like throw shade, but it seems like a oversight, like that could have been avoided.
Uh, yeah, I would say yes and no. It's hard. This is really like it is an oversight, but yeah, how do you test this? Or and then sometimes the development cycle, if it's rapid, then you're
Yeah.
going to have errors, right? And so I would say there certainly is some error, right? But then I think the main thing is like people are expecting developers to develop very fast and do a lot of user experience stuff.
Hmm.
And then it makes the contract more and more complex, which actually goes against one of the security, like
Yeah.
blockchain security stuff, which is like, hey, make your smart contract as simple as possible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
but there's a huge demand on people from people that hey, like I want this to be like user friendly and all that, right? And so what we've seen is that the whole contract system has grown complex, very complex over the time, and then because as this decentralized finance is evolving, and like these yield aggregators especially, they are very dependent on speed, like the
Hmm.
development speed.
Yep.
If there's a new protocol that has new like better yields, I should like quickly develop a set of smart contracts that can farm that. And
Hmm.
so all these kind of mindset kind of makes first of all the development cycle very short, like fast development, without really evaluating all the risk. And then for the user experience improvement, that makes the whole contract system pretty complex. Um, yeah, so those kind of add together. I wouldn't say is their oversight necessarily, but it's like right now we're at the point where people would need to think about the balance of this convenience, user experience, and security, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean everything is still so early that and there's like the FOMO aspect, which is kind of what you're alluding to also. I mean, personally, like I'm so risk averse that like I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to use like I don't want to put my money into something until it's like really battle tested. Even as someone like
Mm-hmm.
who's already like in the space and kind of like some like getting involved with these DeFi protocols, um, but yeah, it's like it's always kind of like a gamble still at these early stages. I feel like.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And as an auditor, like what we constantly see right now is that although like a lot of protocols don't have a proper audit and then they launch, right? That's kind of the worst. But then there are also protocols who got an audit and they launched. But however, because the speed of their development, like or the demand from the ecosystem, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, was for them to like keep building stuff like in the very short term of time, right? So when they launched, they already launched with a set of contracts that we have not audited,
Yeah.
right? And so this is this is exactly the situation in the pickle. Auditors did audited the set of contracts before, that was not vulnerable, and like this this was safe until this commit, right?
Yeah.
So auditors, if you look at the audit report in a technical way, then there's always going to say like, hey, this is the commit that we audited, like
Right.
nothing afterwards is audited, right? But then people like the non-technical people unfortunately don't really understand that, and of course, like who would understand the commit hash? What is commit hash anyway?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And so they just see like, this is audited by someone, and then it
Mm,
must be safe. And then,
yeah.
right, and he trusts all of the contracts. That's because as a
Mm.
user, what you're seeing is this product. This is just one
Yeah,
product,
exactly. Yeah. And
right?
you're seeing the UI,
And
right?
as
And the
an
interface and all
exactly,
that. Yeah.
ex exactly, and then what the auditors are seeing is that exact comment, right? So
Yeah.
there's a discrepancy there, and I do think there's either education effort that needs to be going, like, hey, like
Mm.
auditor's job is not to like first of all, auditor's job is not to ensure the whole protocol is safe because it is like this is super hard to do.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's but auditor's job is to help developers. That's the real auditor's job. Like we are helping the developers to find best practices, potential issues. Like, and we try as hard as we could to find any issues there is on the code, but to serve the developer, right? Like, hey, to inform the developer, like these are the possible stuff, right? And because sometimes given, and since we are serving the developer, it is of course constrained by the resource that the developer give us, right?
Mm.
The resource meaning uh, like perhaps their money, which translates into the amount of time that we are auditing the stuff, right? And also translate to how many people that we're auditing the protocol, right? So that's one, and sometimes they're even if they pay enough, they don't give auditors enough time because the whole market is expecting them to launch like or ship very fast.
Yeah.
And so these kind of resources, like tangible or non-tangible, is kind of limiting auditors' ability in this
Mm.
sense. Um, yeah, I do think people need to realize that, like, first of all, auditors is really helping the developers to serve a better protocol, but it's not the panacea.
Yeah.
We try our best. We do, we do extensive stuff. I highly respect all my colleagues. I see them work. Like some people, different people have different techniques. Like some people would use formal verification even if it's not required by the client.
Mm.
Like people have their preference and like poking around stuff, but um, but it's not a panacea. Like we try our best, but we catch. I would say we catch a lot of stuff, but you know, it's like debugging. You cannot have another pair of eyes and say like, hey, this is now free of bugs.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. It's really cool to like hear your perspective too as an auditor, because like as a developer, like I have been in situations where I'm like feeling the exact like same things that you're talking about. Like smart contract development is still like new enough that it's like I feel like people still have to adapt to that mindset, even if they are like experienced at contract development. Like they're still probably coming from a background where their flow and like development like style and workflow was like drastically different than what it kind of needs to be.
Yeah, definitely. Like
Yeah.
the mindset has to switch, right? Like
Yeah.
and I think uh part of it also comes from the whole market. Like the developers, I know a lot of smart contract developers like is already experienced. Like although they come from, if they have been in this field long enough, then they know like, hey, it's very important to get everything secure and slow down. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the market doesn't allow them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think there's a trade-off, or there there's an educational process that the market needs to realize this, and in some sense, these attacks are an
Part of the
educational
learning. They're part of
experience,
the learning
part of the
process.
learning for the market.
Yeah.
Exactly, for the
Yeah.
market
For the
to
market,
realize
yeah.
that, oh, okay, yeah. And so I guess people would, uh, because of these attacks, then people would start to prefer a slower process, where it seems safer, right? And then with
Yeah.
different kinds of slower process, then hopefully there will be like one good process there, and eventually works out and finds the right balance, strikes the right balance. Yeah. I personally think DeFi is easier to use than traditional finance, though,
Yeah.
to be
I
honest.
I completely agree.
Yeah,
No.
it's just the risk is very high, but other
Yeah.
than that,
Yeah.
it's super easy to use. Like, um, yeah, I have so many troubles with my banking system, but
Yeah.
like I'm so comfortable with this. Of course, I'm biased, but
No, no, but I have the same bias too, and like obviously I'm biased because I am developing in the space, just like in the Web3 blockchain crypto space in general. Um, and so like because of my comfort with Solidity, just like that alone, I'm like, okay, this is not that intimidating and like hard to access. Um, but again, like I said, I'm very risk averse, so I just haven't gotten that deep for that reason.
yeah, it makes sense. I was also very risk averse.
You used to be? You said was?
I used to be.
Things have changed.
Yes,
Things have changed. Prices have
things
gone up.
things 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 have changed.
Yeah.
Like yeah, like the numbers do drive people crazy. So
Yeah. Oh my god,
so
yeah. Yeah, it's like
um,
honestly like I didn't actually I knew that Ethereum was going up. But I didn't realize Bitcoin was on a tear until like a couple days ago. And it was just like a flat like I feel like I'm
yeah,
having a flashback to like 3 years ago. It's crazy. It's like the same, it's like the
yeah,
same kind of
exactly.
feeling phenomenon, same like energy levels and activity in the space. Twitter's blowing up and
Yeah.
like all this stuff. So, yeah, it's really interesting though.
Yeah. Well, and DeFi is also like that, or even more so, I would say.
Yeah.
During the summer, like
Yeah, during the summer. Yeah.
at that time, like people don't realize like all the risks yet. And then you see like crazy yields, like 10 10K APY for like 1 or 2 hours.
Mhm.
10K APY. That's yeah, like like compound. I think in March was 80 APY. At that point of time, like my real life friend was like recommending me like, oh, let me tell you this awesome deal of this awesome bank. They give you like this interest, and I'm like, ah,
Really? Was talking about
what is
you
that?
legit was pitching a bank deal to you? That's hilarious.
Yeah, like well,
Because
they're like
well,
sharing it because they found a good deal, right?
because they found a good deal,
And then
yeah.
that deal, yeah, that deal is like I already forgot the numbers, like one
Oh my
percent or
god.
2%,
It was below
and
10,000.
it was let's not use the 10,000 one, but it's below like 80%, right? So
Right.
I was like,
It's below 80. Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah, like
but
you
then
just can't
yeah,
there's no comparison. There's just no comparison.
there's no comparison. And then after a while, you're like, wait, is my value system already like collapsed? Like, I'm not used to 1%. Like, that's how
Yeah.
normal work, like the sustainable world works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, speaking of compound, like kind of the governance, like I kind of like thought of another. I forgot it was Compound or MakerDAO, but there was an interesting incident where people use Flash Loan to vote. Uh, you know. like
Hmm.
flash loan some governance token and then
Mm-hmm.
use that to vote and flip the result. Um,
Oh,
and
jeez. All
so
right,
like
MakerDAO, flash
using
loans with
using
Ethereum.
governance token, right? Like these governance token and then like the
Mm-hmm.
novel use cases of these like flash loans. And flash loan is like interesting tool that kind of enables normal people to become a whale within one transaction,
Mm.
right?
Yeah,
And
so I remember playing
yeah.
around with flash loans. I think during the same hackathon, the Hack Money one, right? That's when I first
Hmm.
kind of got exposed to flash loans. Um,
Hmm.
and but kind of like to what you were saying earlier, like it kind of contributes again back to like a lot of like pressure in a very short amount of time, right? Because like the only thing you can do, as far as I understand, like the only thing you can do with a flash loan is take advantage of something that's like specifically based on timing, right? Because it's one single
Hmm.
transaction. So like
Yeah.
has to be timed appropriately, and it's just gonna happen in an instant, and then you get the fallout of that.
Yeah, yeah. I would say the legitimate usage of it is like, doing arbitrage, right? There are so
Yeah,
many markets, and it kind of helps to have this flash loan tool to um, flatten out all the markets, right?
mm-hmm.
That's pretty nice, I would say. But at the same time, this is giving like attackers a tool to um, you know have amount whale amount of like funds access
Yeah,
in one single transaction and
yeah,
attack different protocols, right?
right, exactly.
uh
To get all of the like the
Before.
amount of funds that they would need in order to execute the attack in the first place, it makes it really easy to do that.
Yeah, and before this, like whales, like only the whales can do this. It's not that the attack vector doesn't exist, but
Yeah,
the whales have much less incentive to do this kind of stuff because they are already whales, right?
yeah,
They are already like, well off. They don't need to do that. But now you're giving this incentive, like open up this tool for people who have the incentive to do this now. So
mm-hmm.
that's kind of like why this happens. Um, yeah, I kind of feel like Flash Loan is not like what will be the best practices to protect against Flash Loan, or not necessarily Flash Loan, but what is the best practices to protect against whale actually, is a lot of is what a lot of protocols needs to think about, and then
Right,
this really depends on case to cases. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Because basically they're developing in with the assumption that it's really difficult to do this, right? In order to pull this off, like it requires a large amount of funds and some coordination, and
Yeah.
so a small like they're developing under the assumption that a very small subset of people have even the ability to do this, and then like
Yeah.
Flashlands kind of
Yeah.
like takes away that assumption from you, um,
Ye-
and
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it also like has a parallel with mining as well, right? Like kind of mining it, like the security of um, your like governance model, right, is kind of like based on this assumption that you have distributed hash power, and then it's like, okay, what if you don't? Like, what if the reality is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
someone can concentrate the hash power such that they can like now exploit the system. So very similar in that sense.